They called her the Iron Matriarch of Oakhaven County, Judge Clarissa Beaumont. Her gavel did not just end trials, it ended lives. She built a career on maximum sentences for minority defendants, hiding her prejudice behind a veil of law and order. But on a humid day in July, she made a fatal calculation. She looked at the man in the orange jumpsuit and saw only a statistic, a thug, a nobody. She did not know that the man standing before her was not a criminal. He was Special Agent Kendrick Hale, and he was not there to serve time. He was there to serve her. This is the story of how a corrupt judge sentenced the very man building the case to destroy her. The air conditioning in the Oakhaven County Courthouse always hummed with a low, menacing vibration, but it did little to cool the stifling atmosphere of courtroom 4B. This was the domain of the Honorable Clarissa Beaumont. She was a striking figure, steel-gray hair pulled back into a severe bun, eyes the color of flint, and a reputation that terrified defense attorneys across the state. To the wealthy residents of Oakhaven's Northern District, she was a hero. They whispered her name with reverence at the country club, praising her for cleaning up the streets and keeping those people out of their neighborhoods. But to the families in the southern districts, specifically the heavily Black and Hispanic communities, the name Clarissa Beaumont was a curse. State of Georgia versus Kendrick Hale, the bailiff announced, his voice bored. The courtroom was packed. It always was when Beaumont presided over a violent felony. The gallery was a mix of terrified relatives praying for leniency and the local press, who fed off Beaumont's scathing sound bites. Judge Beaumont did not look up from her paperwork as the defendant was shuffled in. She adjusted her glasses, the gold chain glinting under the fluorescent lights. She took a moment to savor the power. She owned this room. She owned the sheriff, Harlan Briggs, who sat in the front row chewing gum. She owned the district attorney, a nervous man named Warren Klein, who owed his election to her endorsement. "Mr. Hale," Beaumont said, finally lifting her eyes. She saw a tall Black man, broad-shouldered, wearing a county-issued orange jumpsuit that was slightly too small. His face was impassive, his eyes dark and unreadable. He looked like 1,000 other men she had sent to the state penitentiary, faceless, nameless, and in her eyes, guilty by default. "You are charged with aggravated assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and possession of a controlled substance with the intent to distribute," Beaumont recited, her voice dripping with disdain. "How do you plead?" The public defender, a young, overworked man named Caleb Whitaker, no relation, simply a cruel coincidence of the roster, stood up. He looked exhausted. He knew the script. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty." Beaumont let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of amusement. It was a sound of dismissal. "Of course he does. They always do." She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto the defendant. "Mr. Hale, I see you are a drifter. No fixed address, no employment history in this state, just passing through our quiet town and decided to cause trouble." Kendrick Hale remained silent. He knew his role. He had to be the defiant, silent type, the kind that irritated a narcissist like Beaumont. "I asked you a question, defendant," she snapped. "I was just driving through, Your Honor," Kendrick said, his voice deep and calm. "Your sheriff pulled me over for a broken taillight. The rest did not happen like they said." Beaumont slammed her hand on the bench, making the stenographer jump. "You will address me as Your Honor, not ma'am, and you will not cast aspersions on the integrity of Sheriff Briggs's department in my courtroom." Bail denied. "We proceed to trial immediately. I will not have my docket clogged up by transients." In the back of the room, a woman in a gray suit scribbled furiously in a notepad. She looked like a reporter, but her focus was not on the defendant. It was entirely on the judge. Kendrick sat back down, his expression remaining stoic. But inside, his heart was racing, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Phase 1 complete, he thought. She took the bait. To understand why Kendrick Hale was sitting in that chair, you had to understand the rot at the heart of Oakhaven. A whistleblower complaint had reached the FBI's Civil Rights Division. It was not just a letter, it was a cache of documents. The source claimed that Judge Beaumont and Sheriff Briggs were running a sentences for cash kickback scheme with a private prison facility, Red Rock Correctional. The scheme was brutal in its simplicity. Sheriff Briggs's deputies would target out-of-towners or vulnerable locals, predominantly Black men, plant evidence, or provoke an altercation and arrest them. Judge Beaumont would then ensure a swift conviction and a maximum sentence to Red Rock. In return, the facility's owners funneled money into a shell company called Vantage Consulting, registered in the Cayman Islands under Beaumont's maiden name. But they needed concrete proof. They needed to see Beaumont manipulate a trial from the inside. They needed a victim who could fight back. Kendrick Hale was the Bureau's best deep-cover operative. He had spent weeks creating the persona of a wandering laborer with a patchy past. He drove a beat-up Ford truck with a deliberately busted taillight into Oak Haven limits, right where he knew Deputy Nolan Reyes, Briggs's right-hand man, patrolled. The arrest had gone exactly as scripted. Reyes had pulled him over. When Kendrick reached for his license, Reyes had screamed, "Gun!" and dragged him out of the car. A bag of methamphetamine was found under the seat, a bag Kendrick had watched Reyes pull from his own pocket. Now in the courtroom, the machinery of injustice was grinding into gear. "The prosecution calls Deputy Reyes to the stand," Warren Klein announced. Reyes strode to the stand, chest puffed out. He detailed a harrowing fictional account of how Kendrick had attacked him, how he had feared for his life, and how the drugs were sitting in plain sight. He was aggressive, violent, Reyes lied, looking straight at the jury. The jury was 12 people selected from the voter rolls, but Kendrick had already noticed the composition: 10 white jurors, 2 older black jurors who looked terrified. Beaumont had dismissed 3 potential jurors who were young and black during voir dire for attitude problems. When Caleb, Kendrick's public defender, stood up to cross-examine, he tried his best. "Deputy, you claim my client attacked you, yet your dash cam footage was corrupted for that exact window. Isn't that convenient?" "Objection," Klein shouted. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Beaumont ruled instantly. "Mr. Whitaker, move on. Technical glitches happen. Do not waste the court's time with conspiracy theories." "But, Your Honor," Caleb pleaded, "there is no physical evidence of an assault, no bruises on the deputy, no torn uniform." "The deputy's sworn testimony is evidence," Beaumont sneered. "If you have nothing substantive, sit down." Kendrick watched Beaumont carefully. He saw the way she exchanged glances with Sheriff Briggs. It was subtle, a slight nod, a twitch of the lips. They were comfortable. They had done this 100 times. They thought they were untouchable gods in this rural fiefdom. During a recess, Kendrick was led to a holding cell. The door clanged shut. Minutes later, the heavy steel door opened and Sheriff Briggs walked in. He was a big man, smelling of tobacco and cheap cologne. He dismissed the guard. "You're in a lot of trouble, son," Briggs said, leaning against the wall. "I didn't do it," Kendrick said, keeping his voice flat. "Doesn't matter," Briggs chuckled. "Judge Beaumont, she doesn't like your kind. Drifters, troublemakers. She's going to bury you at Red Rock." Kendrick looked up. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because there's an alternative," Briggs lowered his voice. "You plead guilty right now. You take the lesser sentence. You save the judge time. Maybe we make sure you get a decent cell. And if I don't?" Briggs's smile vanished. "Then you get the full sentence. And accidents happen in prison, boy. People slip in the shower. People get shanked in the yard. Nobody cares about a stray dog like you." Kendrick met the sheriff's gaze, his eyes hardening. "I'll take my chances with the judge," Briggs spat on the floor. "Suit yourself. Enjoy the show." As Briggs left, Kendrick tapped his heel against the concrete floor 3 times. It was a nervous tick to anyone watching, but to the recording device sewn into the lining of his boot, it was a timestamp marker. Attempted coercion? Check. Back in the courtroom, the trial resumed. It was a massacre. Beaumont overruled every objection the defense made. She sustained every objection from the prosecution. She openly rolled her eyes when Kendrick testified, sighing loudly into the microphone. At one point, she interrupted Kendrick's testimony about the traffic stop. "Mr. Hale, stop lying to this court. It is insulting to my intelligence. You expect us to believe a decorated officer planted drugs on you. You simply fit the profile." "What profile is that, Your Honor?" Kendrick asked. The room went dead silent. Beaumont's face turned a shade of crimson. "The profile of a criminal, a drain on society, someone who brings drugs and violence into my county. One more word out of turn, and I will have you gagged." Kendrick remained silent, but he had what he needed. She had put her bias on the record. The jury, guided by Beaumont's incredibly biased instructions, "You must give heavy weight to the testimony of law enforcement officers," returned a verdict in less than an hour. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman read. Beaumont did not even blink. "Sentencing will be held in the morning. I see no reason to wait. Remand the prisoner." As Kendrick was led away, he locked eyes with the woman in the gray suit in the back row. She gave a microscopic nod. The trap was set. Now it was time for the steel jaws to snap shut. But Beaumont had one more act of cruelty to perform, and Kendrick was counting on it. He needed her to give the maximum sentence. He needed the full weight of her prejudice to be the nail in her coffin. The morning of the sentencing was gray and weeping with rain, matching the mood of Caleb Whitaker. The young public defender sat at the defense table, rubbing his temples. he had barely slept. He knew the system was rigged, but the efficiency with which Judge Beaumont had dismantled his defense was terrifying. He looked at his client, Kendrick, who sat with an eerie calmness that Caleb could not understand. "Kendrick," Caleb whispered, "I'm going to ask for the minimum." "Don't worry, Caleb," Kendrick said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding less like the uneducated laborer he had pretended to be and more like a man in command. "You did your job. You did it well. Just watch." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Clarissa Beaumont swept into the room like a dark storm cloud. She did not look tired. She looked energized. Sentencing days were her favorite. It was the moment she got to play God. She sat down, adjusted her robes, and looked over her spectacles at Kendrick. "Mr. Hale," she began, her voice projecting to the back of the silent courtroom, "you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of heinous crimes against the peace and dignity of Oakhaven County. You attacked a law enforcement officer. You brought poison into our community." She paused for effect, letting her gaze sweep over the gallery. She saw Sheriff Briggs smiling in the front row. She saw the nervous district attorney. "In this county, we believe in consequences," Beaumont continued, her tone sharpening. "I have reviewed your file. You have no roots, no family that claims you. You are a wanderer who believes he can drift into decent towns and sow chaos. Well, not in my town." Caleb stood up. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not," Beaumont snapped. "The time for advocacy is over. This is the time for judgment." She turned back to Kendrick. "I have a responsibility to protect the citizens of Oakhaven from predators like you. I see no remorse in your eyes. I see only arrogance. You think the rules do not apply to you because you have slipped through the cracks of the system for so long. Today, the cracks close." Kendrick stood up slowly. The bailiff took a step forward, hand on his taser, but Beaumont waved him off. She wanted the defendant to hear this standing up. "Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" she asked, expecting silence or a plea for mercy. Kendrick looked her dead in the eye. "I just hope that justice is truly served today, Judge." Beaumont scoffed. "Oh, it will be." She picked up a heavy file and opened it, pretending to read, though she had decided the sentence days ago over a steak dinner with the owner of Red Rock Correctional. "Kendrick Hale, I sentence you to 20 years in the state penitentiary. You will serve your time at the Red Rock Correctional Facility." A gasp went through the courtroom. 20 years for a first-time offense of this nature was unheard of. It was a death sentence. "Furthermore," Beaumont added, hammering the final nail, "due to the violent nature of the assault on an officer, I am designating you a high-risk offender. You will not be eligible for parole for 15 years. She raised her gavel, the wood polished and heavy. It was the instrument of her power, the scepter of her kingdom. "May God have mercy on your soul because this court has none," she declared. Bang! The gavel struck the sound block. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Sheriff Briggs clapped once loudly, then stopped, smirking. The reporter in the back row closed her notebook. "Bailiff," Beaumont said, closing the file. "Take him away." The bailiff moved to grab Kendrick's arm. Caleb Whitaker had his head in his hands. It was over. The ruin of a man's life. Signed, sealed, and delivered in under 10 minutes. Or so they thought. The bailiff's hand was inches from Kendrick's bicep when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was not a sound. It was a sudden electric change in pressure. "Don't touch me," Kendrick said. It was not a shout. It was a command. It was spoken with such absolute authority that the bailiff actually froze, his hand hovering in midair. Judge Beaumont looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me. If you resist, Mr. Hale, I will add another 5 years for contempt. Sheriff, assist the bailiff." Sheriff Briggs stood up, hitching his belt, eager to put his hands on the defendant. "With pleasure, Your Honor." Kendrick turned slightly, not to the sheriff, but to the back of the room. He nodded once at the woman in the gray suit. "Now," Kendrick said. The woman stood up. She did not look like a reporter anymore. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a gold badge on a leather backing, holding it high. "Federal agents!" she screamed, her voice piercing the room. "Nobody move!" At that exact second, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a crash that shook the walls. 12 men and women in full tactical FBI windbreakers, armed with rifles and sidearms, flooded into the courtroom. "FBI, get down! Get down!" The chaos was instant. The gallery screamed. The district attorney dove under his table. Sheriff Briggs froze, his hand halfway to his own gun, before he saw 3 red laser dots dancing on his chest. Hands where we can see them, Briggs, an agent shouted. Do it now, or we drop you. Briggs slowly raised his hands, his face draining of all color. Judge Beaumont was standing, her face a mask of shock and outrage. What is the meaning of this? She shrieked, her voice cracking. This is a court of law. I am a judge. Who do you think you are? Kendrick Hale turned back to the bench. He did not look like a convict anymore. He stood taller, his posture military straight. He looked at the bailiff, who was trembling. Uncuff me, Kendrick said calmly. Now. The bailiff fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so hard he dropped them twice. He finally unlocked the handcuffs. Kendrick rubbed his wrists, then reached into his jumpsuit pocket, a pocket where he was not supposed to have anything, and pulled out a small, thin earpiece he had concealed during the trial. He tossed it onto the defense table. He walked toward the bench. The tactical team parted to let him through. He stopped right in front of the judge's podium. You asked who I am, Kendrick said, his voice ringing clear in the stunned silence. I am Special Agent in Charge Kendrick Hale, FBI Public Corruption Task Force. Beaumont's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She gripped the edge of her bench so hard her knuckles turned white. You're the defendant, she stammered. I just sentenced you. You sentenced a legend, Clarissa, Kendrick said coldly, using her first name like a weapon. You sentenced a ghost. The man you thought you were sending to Red Rock does not exist, but the crimes you committed to put him there, those are very real. This is entrapment, Beaumont screamed, finding her voice. I will have your badge. I know senators. I know the governor. We know, Kendrick said calmly. We have them on wiretaps, too. We have been listening for months. Every phone call to the warden at Red Rock, every kickback payment laundered through Vantage Consulting. We have the bank records. We have the emails. And thanks to the last 2 days, we have you on record, denying due process, colluding with the prosecution, and conspiring with the sheriff to frame an innocent man. You did not just break the law, Judge. You shattered it, and I was the one holding the pieces. Sheriff Briggs was being slammed against the wall by 2 agents, cuffs clicking onto his wrists. Reyes! Briggs yelled, looking for his deputy. But Deputy Reyes was already on the floor, zip-tied. Kendrick walked up the 2 steps to the bench, invading the judge's sacred space. He pulled a folded document from his back pocket. Clarissa Beaumont, Kendrick said, his voice hard as iron. You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to deprive rights under color of law, wire fraud, and judicial corruption. He leaned in close, so close she could see the fire in his eyes. You like maximum sentences, Judge. The federal sentencing guidelines for what you have done mean you are looking at decades. You are going to die in a cage. Beaumont slumped back into your leather chair. The iron matriarch seemed to shrink, physically withering under the weight of the truth. She looked at the gallery. The people she had terrorized for years were staring at her. The 2 black jurors she had kept on the panel were watching with wide, stunned eyes. Then slowly a smile crept onto Kendrick's face. Oh, and Judge? Beaumont looked up, tears of rage and terror welling in her eyes. That prison you have stock in, Red Rock, we raided it an hour ago. It is being shut down. You will not be going there. We have a special spot waiting for you in federal custody. General population. Get her out of my sight, Kendrick ordered the agents. 2 female agents stepped up to the bench. They did not treat her with the deference the bailiff had. They grabbed her arms firmly. Stand up, one agent barked. Judge Clarissa Beaumont, the most powerful woman in Oak Haven, was hauled out of her chair. She stumbled, her robes tangling around her legs. As they marched her down the steps, the silence in the courtroom broke. It started with a single slow clap from the back, then another. Then the gallery erupted, not in cheers, but in a low, rumbling murmur of disbelief and vindication. Caleb Whitaker, the public defender, was still standing at his table, his mouth agape. Kendrick turned to him. You are a good lawyer, Caleb, Kendrick said, extending a hand. You fought for a man you thought was guilty because you believed in the system. Keep doing that. We need people like you. Caleb shook the hand, dumbfounded. I thought I lost. You did not lose, Kendrick said, looking at the door where Beaumont was being dragged out, kicking and screaming about her rights. Today you helped us win the biggest case in state history. Kendrick turned to the camera crew, the real news crew that had just been ushered in by the FBI press liaison. He looked straight into the lens. The docket is closed, he said. The interrogation room at the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department smelled of stale coffee and fear. For years, this room had been Sheriff Harlan Briggs's torture chamber, a place where confessions were beaten out of suspects and lives were signed away. Now the dynamic had flipped violently. Judge Clarissa Beaumont sat at the metal table, her wrists handcuffed to the loop in the center. She had been stripped of her judicial robes, leaving her in a silk blouse that now looked rumpled and pathetic. She was not screaming anymore. She was calculating. She was a survivor, a shark who had navigated political waters for decades. She believed this was just another deal to be made. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Kendrick Hale walked in. He had changed out of the orange jumpsuit into a crisp suit, his FBI badge clipped to his belt. He carried a single manila folder. He did not sit down. He leaned against the wall, watching her. "I want my lawyer," Beaumont hissed, her voice returning to its icy composure. "And I want Warren Klein. He is the district attorney." Kendrick let out a dry chuckle. "Warren Klein is currently in interview room B crying. He is telling my agents everything, Clarissa. Every bribe you took, every verdict you fixed. He is singing like a bird to cut a deal." Beaumont's eye twitched. "Warren is a weak fool. You have nothing on me. My rulings are matters of judicial discretion. You cannot criminalize a judge for being tough on crime." "Tough on crime?" Kendrick pushed off the wall and tossed the folder onto the table. It slid across and hit her cuffed hands. "Open it." Beaumont hesitated, then flipped the cover with clumsy fingers. Her face went pale. It was a bank statement. Cayman National Bank, account holder, Vantage Consulting. The balance was over $8 million. "We know about the referral fees from Red Rock," Kendrick said, his voice dropping low. "That is why you gave me 20 years, right? That is a hefty payout for one morning's work." "This is circumstantial," Beaumont stammered, closing the folder. "You cannot prove I control that account." Kendrick pulled a remote from his pocket and pointed it at the one-way mirror. The TV screen mounted in the corner flickered to life. The video was grainy, taken from a hidden camera inside a golf cart. It showed Beaumont and a man in a white suit, the CEO of Red Rock Correctional. They were laughing. "We need more bodies in Block C, Clarissa," the man said. "The state contract requires high occupancy, or we lose our funding." "Don't worry, Bill," Beaumont's voice on the recording was crystal clear. "I have a docket full of trash next week. I will fill Block C up. Just make sure the transfer hits the island account by Friday." Kendrick turned off the TV. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "That recording was authorized by a federal warrant months ago," Kendrick said softly. "We have audio of you calling defendants livestock. We have you joking about ruining Caleb Whitaker's career because he actually tried to defend someone. It is over, Clarissa." Beaumont slumped. The shark had forgotten how to swim. She looked up at Kendrick, her eyes wet, but not with remorse, with self-pity. "I kept this town safe," she whispered. "I did what was necessary. You do not understand the animals I deal with." Kendrick leaned across the table, his face inches from hers. "The only animal in this room is you. You sold human lives for luxury cars and vacations. You took fathers away from their children so you could renovate your kitchen." He stood up and knocked on the door. "Process her, no bail, flight risk." As the door opened, Beaumont shouted, desperate now. "Wait! I can give you bigger fish. The governor, the state senator, I can give you names." Kendrick paused at the threshold. He looked back, disgust etched on his face. "We already have the senator. Briggs gave him up minutes ago. You have nothing to trade, Judge. You are the bottom of the barrel." The door slammed shut, leaving the Iron Matriarch alone with her reflection in the mirror. The arrest of Judge Clarissa Beaumont was not a quiet affair. It was a seismic event that shattered the foundations of Oakhaven County, sending shockwaves far beyond the courtroom walls. By the time the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the courthouse dome in hues of bruised purple and orange, the sleepy town had transformed into the epicenter of a national media firestorm. Satellite trucks from major networks clogged the streets, their dishes pointed skyward like hungry mouths waiting to be fed. Reporters jockeyed for position on the courthouse steps, shouting into microphones, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of breaking news. The headline was plastered across every ticker in America: "Justice for sale, judge and sheriff arrested in massive FBI sting." Inside the sheriff's department, the atmosphere was apocalyptic. For decades, this building had been a fortress of silence where corruption festered in the dark. Now it was an anthill kicked over by a giant boot. Federal agents and windbreakers swarmed the hallways, boxing up files, seizing hard drives, and tagging evidence. The deputies who had served under Sheriff Harlan Briggs, men who had walked with swagger only hours before, now sat huddled in the break room, stripped of their badges, waiting to be interviewed. The fear in the air was palpable. The Brotherhood of the Blue Wall had crumbled the moment the handcuffs clicked onto Briggs's wrists. Kendrick Hale stood on the portico of the courthouse, watching the chaos unfold with a stoic expression. He had changed back into his suit, the orange jumpsuit of the convict discarded, but the weight of the role still hung on him. He was not just watching a crime scene, he was watching a liberation. Across the street in the town square, the people of Oak Haven were gathering. It started slowly, a few curious onlookers from the local shops. But as the news spread through the grapevine, particularly in the southern districts that had lived under the boot of Beaumont's tyranny for so long, the crowd swelled into the hundreds. They did not come with pitchforks. They came with relief. They came to see with their own eyes that the witch was truly dead. Caleb Whitaker, the young public defender who had unwittingly played a pivotal role in the sting, emerged from the side door of the courthouse. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. His tie was loosened, his hair messy, and his eyes were wide with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He spotted Kendrick near the pillars and walked over, his legs slightly unsteady. "Is it true?" Caleb asked, his voice barely rising above the din of the news helicopters hovering overhead. "The Department of Justice is seizing everything?" Kendrick turned, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Every single case Beaumont presided over in the last decade is under immediate review. We have brought in a special task force of federal magistrates. They are setting up a command center in the library. Red Rock Correctional is being audited as we speak. The warden was picked up at the airport, trying to board a flight to Costa Rica." Caleb leaned against the stone pillar, shaking his head in disbelief. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked, a casualty of the day's chaos. "Look at this, Kendrick. My phone has not stopped buzzing. It is not just reporters. It is families, mothers, wives, sons, people I have not seen in years. They are asking if it is real. They are asking if their loved ones are coming home." "Tell them yes," Kendrick said, his voice firm. "Tell them it is real. I have clients, men who pleaded guilty just to avoid Beaumont's wrath, who are calling me crying," Caleb said, his voice choking up. "Happy tears, Kendrick. I have never heard happy tears in this line of work before. I did not think I ever would." "You're going to be a busy man, counselor," Kendrick said, clapping a heavy hand on the younger man's shoulder. "We are going to need honest lawyers to handle the exoneration hearings. The state is going to try to drag its feet, but we will not let them. You up for the fight?" Caleb straightened his posture, wiping a smudge of dirt from his lapel. The fatigue seemed to melt away, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. "I was born for this fight," he replied. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black Lincoln town car that screeched to a halt at the curb, scattering a group of cameramen. The door flew open, and Mayor Douglas Whitaker stumbled out. Whitaker was a man who prided himself on his appearance, always tanned, always manicured. But today he looked like he was melting. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes darted around frantically. He spotted Kendrick and the FBI insignia on his belt and made a beeline for him, putting on a mask of outraged virtue for the cameras flashing nearby. "Agent Hale," Mayor Whitaker bellowed, waving his arms. "I just want to go on the record. The city council had absolutely no knowledge of this corruption. We are shocked, appalled by the actions of Judge Beaumont and Sheriff Briggs. We fully support this investigation." Kendrick stepped down one stair, placing himself directly in the mayor's path. He did not raise his voice, but his presence was so commanding that Whitaker physically recoiled. "Save the speech for the press conference, Mr. Mayor," Kendrick said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that the microphones could not pick up. "Excuse me," Whitaker stammered, his smile faltering. "We found the emails, Douglas," Kendrick said, using the mayor's first name with deliberate disrespect. "The ones from years ago. The ones where you asked Sheriff Briggs to clean up the downtown area before your re-election campaign. You specifically told him to remove the eyesores and arrest the homeless on vagrancy charges. You fed the machine, Mr. Mayor." Whitaker's face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. "Now see here, that was urban renewal." "We are still reading the files," Kendrick interrupted, his eyes boring into the mayor's soul. "You are not under arrest today. But if I were you, I would not get comfortable, and I definitely would not plan any long trips." The mayor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Without another word, he turned and scurried back to his car like a cockroach caught in the light, speeding away from the scene of his complicity. But the true climax of the day was yet to come. An hour later, as twilight deepened into night, a hush fell over the crowd in the square. A large white bus, marked with the seal of the State Department of Corrections, turned the corner. It was followed by two more. These were not the buses that usually took men away to prison. These were the return vessels. The bus hissed to a halt in front of the courthouse steps. The doors folded open. The first man to step off was unrecognizable to the press. But to the woman standing at the front of the barricade, he was the world. He was a middle-aged mechanic named David who had lost his business and years of his life because he refused to fix the sheriff's personal car for free. "David!" the woman screamed, breaking through the police line. The reunion was the spark that ignited the powder keg of emotion. The crowd erupted, not in anger, but in a roar of pure, unfiltered joy. There were screams, sobs, and prayers shouted to the heavens. Kendrick watched from the shadows of the portico, feeling a lump form in his own throat. He saw men who had been hardened by the system stepping off the bus, blinking in the fresh air, their faces crumbling as they saw their children running toward them. He saw a young black man, no older than 19, step off the second bus. This was the kid Kendrick had shared a holding cell with briefly, a kid named Jamal who had been arrested for loitering while waiting for a bus to his community college classes. Jamal looked terrified, expecting a trick. Then he saw his grandmother, a tiny woman with a cane, hobbling toward him as fast as she could. Jamal dropped his bag and fell to his knees, burying his face in her dress as she wrapped her arms around him, rocking him back and forth. "Good work, Hale." Kendrick did not turn. He recognized the gravelly voice of Assistant Director Miller, his supervisor, who had flown in from D.C. to oversee the fallout. "It is not done," Kendrick said, his eyes still fixed on Jamal and his grandmother. Beaumont and Briggs, they were monsters, yes, but they were just the symptoms. The disease is the prophet. As long as places like Red Rock make money off heads and beds, as long as judges have investment portfolios tied to incarceration rates, this will happen again. Miller sighed, lighting a cigarette and looking out at the chaotic, beautiful scene. "Maybe. The system is a beast, Kendrick. We cannot kill it in a day." "No," Kendrick agreed. "But we heard it today." Miller nodded. "We did. You destroyed the machine in Oak Haven. That counts for something." "I did not destroy it," Kendrick said, finally turning to walk away as the camera flashes lit up the night like lightning. "I just turned on the lights. The roaches did the rest." As Kendrick walked toward his unmarked car, intending to finally drive out of Oak Haven and never look back, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a text message from an unknown number. No name, no caller ID, just a single image. It was a grainy photo taken of the wall inside Interrogation Room 2, the room where Beaumont had been held before her transfer. Scratched into the paint, jagged and frantic, were 3 words. "You haven't won." Kendrick stared at the screen. The chill that ran down his spine had nothing to do with the night air. It was a reminder that evil rarely accepts defeat gracefully. It festers. It plots. He did not reply. He did not trace the number. He simply deleted the message, slid the phone back into his pocket, and got into his car. Let them threaten, he thought. Let them plot. He had exposed the truth, and for the first time in years, the scales of justice in Oak Haven were balanced. The Iron Matriarch was gone, her kingdom of fear dismantled. As he drove past the town square, he saw Caleb Whitaker lifting a child onto his shoulders, laughing. Kendrick allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Let them try to take this back, he thought. I will be waiting. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. For Judge Clarissa Beaumont, the time following her arrest was a slow-motion car crash from which she could not look away. The trial itself was a spectacle that eclipsed even the most sensational murder cases Oak Haven had ever seen. The courtroom, where she had once reigned as a god, was now the theater of her destruction. This time, however, she sat at the defendant's table, small and diminished without her robes, while a federal prosecutor, a sharp-witted woman named Elena Ross, methodically dismantled her life. The betrayal was absolute. Warren Klein, the district attorney she had practically handpicked, took the stand. To save himself, Klein poured out every secret, every bribe, and every dirty conversation they had ever shared over scotch in her chambers. He detailed how Beaumont would laugh about filling the pens at Red Rock Correctional, referring to human beings as livestock. When the jury returned the verdict, they did not look at her. Guilty, the foreman said. Then he said it again and again. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights. The sentencing hearing was the final nail. The federal judge, a man known for his integrity, looked at Beaumont with undisguised contempt. Clarissa Beaumont, he said, his voice echoing in the packed room. You were entrusted with the sacred duty of upholding the law. Instead, you sold it. You did not just break the law, you broke the public trust in a way that may never be fully repaired. He sentenced her to decades in federal prison. Beaumont gasped. It was a life sentence. She was not sent to a minimum security camp where white-collar criminals played tennis. Because of her position of power and the sheer scale of her corruption, the Bureau of Prisons designated her a high security risk. She was transferred to a facility known for its grim, unyielding conditions Beaumont herself had once lobbied to maintain, arguing famously in an interview that prison should not be comfortable, it should be a deterrent. The irony began the moment the bus passed through the razor wire gates. The iron matriarch, who had spent decades in tailored Chanel suits and silk blouses, was ushered into a cold, sterile processing room. "Strip!" the intake officer barked. She was a young woman, no older than 25, chewing gum loudly. "I beg your pardon," Beaumont said, her voice trembling. "I am a former judge. I demand some dignity." The officer stopped chewing. She looked Beaumont up and down with dead eyes. "You are not a judge here, inmate. You are just another number. Strip, or we take you to the hole." Beaumont stripped. She stood naked on the cold concrete while they sprayed her hair for lice. She was handed a used bra that was too tight, oversized underwear, and a beige uniform that smelled faintly of mildew and old sweat. As she pulled the scratchy fabric over her skin, the last vestige of Clarissa Beaumont died. Inmate number was born. The true weight of karma, however, is not just physical. It is the systematic dismantling of the ego. Early in her sentence, her lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Klein, came to visit. They sat in the visitation room, separated by a thick sheet of scratched plexiglass. "The civil asset forfeiture is complete," the lawyer said, shuffling papers. "The lake house?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Please tell me they did not take the lake house. It is in a trust." "The RICO Act pierced the trust," he explained. "It is gone. The house, the Mercedes, the investment portfolio, the offshore accounts in the Caymans, it has all been liquidated to pay restitution to the victims." Beaumont felt a cold pit open in her stomach. "Everything. You have $74 in your commissary account. That is all that is left." Beaumont closed her eyes. And Douglas? Has he called?" The lawyer hesitated. He pulled a letter from his briefcase and pressed it against the glass. It was a legal document, petition for dissolution of marriage. "He filed yesterday," the lawyer said softly. "He gave a statement to the press. He claims he was blinded by love and knew nothing of your crimes. He is distancing himself to save his own political consulting firm. He is taking the dogs, Clarissa, and he has already listed the town home." She sat there, the phone receiver slick with sweat in her hand. She had spent a lifetime accumulating power, wealth, and status. She believed these things made her untouchable. In the span of a brief conversation, she learned she was destitute, homeless, and divorced. She was utterly alone. The climax of her suffering came during the peak of a sweltering Florida summer. Beaumont had been assigned to the prison laundry detail. It was backbreaking work. The ventilation in the laundry block had been broken for weeks, a result of budget cuts. The very kind of budget cuts Beaumont had championed for years to save taxpayer money. The heat was suffocating, a wet blanket of steam and noise. The industrial washers roared, shaking the floor. Beaumont was hauling a heavy canvas cart filled with wet sheets. Her arms, once used only to bang a gavel, shook with the effort. Suddenly, a sharp pain lanced through her chest. It felt like an elephant had stepped on her sternum. Her left arm went numb. The room spun violently. Beaumont collapsed. She hit the wet concrete hard, the cart tipping over. "Help!" she wheezed, clutching her chest. "Someone help!" The guard on duty was Officer Higgins. He was a large man who hated his job, hated the heat, and hated inmates who caused problems. He walked over slowly, his boots squishing on the wet floor. He stood over Beaumont, looking down at her with a bored expression. "Get up, Beaumont," Higgins said. "Heart," Beaumont gasped, tears mingling with the sweat on her face. "I think heart attack." Higgins did not reach for his radio. He did not call medical. He just smirked. "Right," Higgins said. "Just like you had a migraine when it was time to scrub the grout. I know your type." Beaumont stared up at him, her vision tunneling. The words sounded familiar. "Please," she whispered. "I am dying." Higgins leaned down, and in a twist of fate so cruel it felt scripted, he repeated the exact logic Beaumont had used to imprison Kendrick Hale. "You fit the profile, Beaumont," Higgins sneered. "The profile of a manipulator, a liar who wants to get out of work. If you are not up in 5 seconds, I am writing you up for malingering. That is a week in solitary." Beaumont tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was trapped in a hell of her own design. She had built a career on ignoring the pleas of the desperate, on assuming guilt, on denying medical leniency to defendants she deemed actors. Now, as her heart stuttered and failed, she was looking into the face of her own apathy. She did not die that day. Another inmate, A woman serving time for check fraud eventually screamed loud enough that a nurse was called. Beaumont was rushed to the infirmary. She survived, but the heart attack left her heart muscle permanently damaged. She was now frail, weak, and required an oxygen tank to sleep. Years later, Meredith Vance was now an old woman, a ghost haunting the geriatric wing of the prison. She spent her days in a wheelchair, staring at the blurry television in the common room. One evening, a special news report interrupted the broadcast. The screen showed a press conference in Washington, D.C. The headline read, "New Director of FBI Civil Rights Division sworn in." A man walked to the podium. He had gray at his temples now, but his shoulders were broad and his eyes were fierce and kind. It was Kendrick Hale. Beaumont watched, mesmerized. "Justice," Kendrick said to the cameras, his voice clear and strong, "is not a weapon we use to punish those we dislike. It is a shield to protect the vulnerable. When I stood in a courtroom in Oak Haven years ago, I saw what happens when the law loses its soul. I swore then that I would dedicate my life to ensuring that never happens again." The camera panned to the audience. In the front row sat Caleb Whitaker, now a federal judge, clapping proudly. In the prison common room, the other inmates ignored the TV, arguing over a card game. But Beaumont could not look away. She saw the man she tried to bury, rising to the highest peak of honor. She looked down at her own withered hands, gripping the wheels of her chair. She realized then that Kendrick had been right all those years ago. He had not just defeated her. He had transcended her. The Iron Matriarch was just a footnote in his biography, a cautionary tale told to law students. A tear leaked from her eye and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly before anyone could see. In prison, weakness was dangerous. But as she wheeled herself back to her cell to stare at the cinder block walls, she finally understood the verdict. She was exactly where she belonged. And that is the incredible, twisting story of Judge Clarissa Beaumont and Agent Kendrick Hale. It is a chilling reminder that in the end, no one is above the law, not even the people who hold the gavel. Beaumont thought she was a god in her courtroom, destroying lives for profit and prejudice. She thought she could crush a nobody drifter, but she forgot the golden rule. Be careful who you step on, because they might be the very person building the trapdoor beneath your feet. Justice in Oak Haven was not swift, but it was absolute. Beaumont did not just lose her freedom, she faced the very same cold, unfeeling system she had inflicted on so many others. It is a classic case of what goes around, comes around, served with a side of federal prison time. What do you think about the ending? Did the punishment fit the crime? Do you think decades was enough for the lives she ruined, or should it have been more? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this story of undercover justice and massive karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells YouTube you want more stories like this one. Do not forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.